Hello my amazing people, and welcome back to my channel. If you're back, if you are new, welcome to my channel. I'm Shayna and I have another true crime case for you today. Just my usual disclaimer, this is all information that I have found online that I've compiled into a video for educational purposes. I didn't post a video on Sunday because I was actually on vacation, which was a really good time. I was like, my goal for the entire vacation was to not get sunburned. So I experienced a very prominent sunburn if I don't wear sunscreen. And when I was little, I was always like, I don't need no sunscreen. You know, I got melanin. Girl, I don't have enough to prevent me from getting sunburned. So I made sure I had my sunscreen packed. I was ready. I was prepared. We were both putting it on no matter where we were going. And I managed to evade getting sunburned except for my upper lip, y'all. And now it's at that like stage where it's turning darker and it's about to peel, so I look like Jafar when I don't have makeup on, and it's just not a good situation. Make sure you put on your sunscreen under your makeup. All right, anyway, let's get into today's case. The story that I'm telling you about today actually took place in 1965. It has been 56 years since this case took place, and believe it or not, it is still ongoing. So when I found out about it, I just said to myself, I have to dive into this case and cover it on my channel because it's one of those that was solved really quickly, but there was a lot that happened afterwards. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining me today, and let's get started. The story that we're talking about today actually took place in 1965 in Mansfield, Ohio, which was a really small town, a tiny town, and it was considered a really safe place to live. Like everyone who lived there, they didn't have any issues with safety. They never experienced any type of violence or felt like they were living in an unsafe area. But unfortunately, that is how a lot of these stories start out. Back in the 50s and 60s, Mansfield was the home of a 14-year-old girl named Mary Ellen Deener and her 6 siblings. Mary Ellen really loved spending time with all of her friends and her family, and she had so many friends. She was just this really lively little girl who was always giggling and spending time outside, playing hopscotch, riding her bike, and playing with her dolls. She really loved to spend time with all of her siblings because she had such a big family, and all the neighborhood children knew her because she was the person who was always outside wanting to have some fun. In addition to this, Mary Ellen really loved helping people. She knew that she wanted to be a nun, and she chose this profession as her dream career because she felt like it would give her the best opportunity of giving back to people in the community, and that was something that was really important for her as a 12-year-old girl. She didn't want to be a superstar, a celebrity, a famous singer. She just wanted to make sure that whatever she did, she was able to give back, and being a nun was that ideal career path for her. Like most households, the children were responsible for helping out with household chores, and since there were 7 of them, they pretty much were responsible for all the chores because they most likely were the only ones messing everything up. And Mary Ellen's brothers kind of did the more laborious tasks. They would mop the floors, they would take out the trash, and the girls did more of the homemaker type chores. They would do the dishes, they would do the laundry, and it was like a normal, regular kind of schedule that they had where they knew they all had to pitch in, but it was so many of them that getting stuff done didn't take long at all. On November 14th of 1965, Mary Ellen and her 12-year-old sister Brenda Sue were doing all the laundry in the house, and when they were finished doing the laundry cycles, they realized that their dryer was broken. It wasn't turning on, and they weren't able to dry any clothes inside of it. So they went to their mom. They said, "Mom, you know, we did the laundry, but we can't dry anything, so is it okay if we take a taxi down to the laundromat?" And at this time, it had been later in the day. It was dark outside, but the girl's mother thought that it was okay because the laundromat was only 1 block away from their house, and right next to the laundromat was the girl's grandmother's house. So their mom knew that if anything happened to them, they could quickly go and seek shelter with their grandmother, and that the laundromat was really just around the corner. It was basically 1 long block away, so maybe a 2-minute taxi drive. So she didn't feel like this was anything out of the ordinary, and the girls knew, you know, how to go to the laundromat, how to get the change. They knew exactly what to do, and 14 and 12 years old, she felt like it was okay for them to go alone. So the girls hop in the taxi, they make their way over to Spring Mill Street, which is where their grandmother's house and the laundromat are located. They get all the wet clothes in the dryer. Well, they start doing loads of the wet clothes in the dryer, and things are going fine. They're sitting there, they're playing, they're just relaxing, but they realize that they're probably gonna need more change because they need a couple more cycles to get all of the clothes dry. So Mary Ellen and Brenda Sue are talking, and they're like, okay, well, maybe one of us should probably stay here to make sure our clothes are safe, and the other one can walk to the other laundromat, which is about a 5-minute walk away, to get some change. And it wasn't clear if the laundromat that they were at had a machine but it was broken, or if they didn't have a coin machine at all. But either way, they knew that they had to make their way to get change. So Brenda Sue stayed with the clothes, and Mary Ellen began walking to the other laundromat to get the change that they needed. And she told Brenda Sue, I will only be gone for probably 10-15 minutes at most, and I will be right back. After some time had gone by, Brenda Sue realized that it was way more than 10-15 minutes that her sister told her she would be gone, and Brenda starts to worry. So she's like, okay, I'm just gonna go over to my grandmother's house to see if maybe she can help me look for Mary Ellen. So she leaves the laundromat, she goes to her grandmother's house, and she says, I don't know where Mary Ellen is. She went to the other laundromat to get change and she hasn't been back. And her grandmother says, okay, look, you sit here. I'm gonna go walk around the block. I can probably get there quicker. I want you to stay safe. So she leaves the house and she goes and begins making her way down to the other laundromat. This laundromat was located on Mulberry Street, which was perpendicular to Spring Mill Street, where the other laundromat was located. And as soon as the grandmother turns the corner on Mulberry Street, she sees a bunch of police. She sees a bunch of lights. She doesn't know what's going on, but she makes her way down the street towards where the laundromat is located, and she's stopped by police. And she says to police, look, I'm just looking for my granddaughter. I don't know what's going on out here. Obviously, it looks like something's wrong, but I'm just trying to make sure my granddaughter's okay. She was just going around the corner. She was supposed to be right back, and she's been gone for some time. And unfortunately, the police give her the news that she was walking towards an active crime scene, and that there actually was a girl who was believed to be in her teenage years who was in really bad condition. They let the grandmother walk to see who this girl was, and she quickly identified the girl laying on the ground as her granddaughter, Mary Ellen Deener. Mary did not appear to be breathing. She did sustain 2 gunshot wounds and a very large wound to her head that had been made with some sort of blunt object. And her grandmother was just so heartbroken. She made the discovery that her granddaughter wasn't in a good way. And it was just really sad because it was very clear that Mary Ellen had already passed by the time her grandmother got down there. And I just can't imagine the feelings of, what if I had gotten here sooner? What exactly went wrong? Why was she by herself? All of the questions that was probably running through this poor grandmother's mind, and of course the mind of Mary Ellen's mother when she found out about what had happened to her. And Brenda Sue experienced a very large amount of grief and pain from the loss of her sister, and she was actually in shock for a very long time after this. I can only imagine. We all know that feeling of guilt even when we don't directly cause something to happen, that feeling of, could I have done something differently? Should I have gone with her? Is this my fault? So based on the interviews that was done by one of their other sisters, Brenda was in shock for a very long time. From the very beginning, police were able to determine that foul play was involved in Mary Ellen's case, and one of the very first things that they did was tried to determine which firearm the bullets on the scene had come from. They were able to determine the caliber of gun that had fired the bullets that were found near Mary Ellen, and they actually determined that it was an Ivor Johnson revolver that was responsible for the bullets at the scene. And they made this decision to go to every hardware store and every gun store in the area to figure out where this specific gun was purchased from, and therefore figured out who this firearm was registered to. And there was one record from a hardware store of a purchase of this specific type of gun by a man named Lester Eubanks, who actually grew up and currently lived in the Mansfield area. Lester was 22 at the time, and he was a long-term resident of Mansfield, and people didn't really know him that well because he kept to himself, but people had seen him in the area because he would consistently walk throughout the neighborhoods. He would walk up and down blocks, and he always had these very specific nunchucks with him. Not many people walk around with nunchucks, I mean now, or I'm sure back in the 60s, but he would always walk around with these nunchucks that he would swing around, and people will remember this. And some of Mary Ellen's siblings actually remember seeing Lester in the neighborhood just over the years with these nunchucks. And he was described by some to be handsome, not my words, but the words of the internet. He was described to be well dressed. He was described to be well liked, but he was also opinionated, sometimes had an attitude, and he was just usually, like I said, a loner. So his interactions with people were very limited, but when he did interact with people, it usually was a good impression, but there were that certain few who didn't really have the best impression of him. Lester had been arrested twice in the past for SA offenses, and at the time of Mary Ellen's case, he actually was out on bond for his most recent SA incident. Police also wanted to do some groundwork to actually talk to people who lived in the area to see if they had seen anything the night that this took place. And there was one witness who reported to police that they saw Lester walking in the same area on the same street that Mary Ellen was found. And so he had basically this gun being registered to him, his history of SA and different SAs, and him being in the area, being seen in the area the same night. So police were pretty confident that they had the right guy from the beginning. Lester was brought in for police questioning the following day, and when they sat him down and asked him what he knew about the events that took place, he confessed almost immediately. He came out, he said, yeah, I did it, and he gave police a full rundown of what happened. He was just walking around in the area. He wasn't specifically looking for Mary Ellen, but he saw her walking by herself and he saw it as an opportunity. He pulled her behind one of the local houses and attempted to do with her what he did in the past that he had a history of. And Mary Ellen screamed and she resisted, and he used his firearm on her twice. At this point, he left her where she was and he made his way around the corner to his apartment. He changed clothes. He actually got dressed up nice for the evening because he was planning to go out dancing that night. And when he was done changing his clothes and made his way back out of his apartment, he walked the path where he knew that he had left her. And when he saw her there, she was still alive, clinging to life. And he saw this in his messed up brain as her asking for help to finish basically what he had started. And he took a brick, and that is what caused the blunt force trauma of the head, and that was the fatal blow for Mary Ellen. Lester was pretty emotionless throughout the entire thing. He didn't express any remorse when he gave his confession, and the most frustrating part about all of it is that he was allowed to be on the streets. Offenders who have a history of more than one time doing this are just so incredibly likely to reoffend again that him being allowed to be out on bond is infuriating, because the chance of him doing this was almost guaranteed. And that's probably one of the most frustrating parts of this case, is that all of it could have been avoided if he had been in custody at this time. The case ended up going to trial, and Lester requested to testify, and probably one of the most hurtful things you can do is to allow a case to go to trial and then give a full confession twice and stand up in front of the family, offer no remorse, no apology, no sort of, I just hope you guys are okay. He almost seemed like the only thing that he was upset about was the fact that he got caught. He didn't care at all about the pain that he had caused to Mary Ellen or her family. And it just goes to show, like, from this point forward, if he ever had the chance to be back out on the street again, he was guaranteed to offend, because the emotional disconnect was just so obvious. But Mary Ellen's family was able to breathe a sigh of relief when Lester was sentenced to the death penalty. Ohio State Penitentiary is where Lester awaited his fate, and he was largely by himself. He was still a loner even in prison. He liked to spend his time reading, writing, drawing, and painting, and while he was an awful person, he was a very talented painter. And the actual inmates in the penitentiary with him didn't like him very much. He was described to be cocky, very opinionated, and He didn't want to spend time with any of the inmates anyway, but when he did, he didn't really leave a good impression with them. But he would always make a very conscious effort to sweet talk the guards. He would butter them up. He would make them feel like he was this star prisoner, that he was just this sweetheart, and all of them really grew to like him in a weird way, because they all knew what kind of person that he was outside of here, but he was just this really polite and overly friendly type of person with the guards, and not at all like that with the other inmates at all. It's quite common for inmates to await their fate when they are on death row for quite a long time before they actually have the event take place. And it wasn't a surprise to people when Lester's date kept getting pushed back. It actually got pushed back 3 times for unknown reasons, but everybody was just like, okay, this is probably normal. Like, the dates get pushed back quite frequently anyway, and nobody really thought much of anything. But it was a really, really big development in 1972 when Ohio completely abolished the death penalty altogether, which then reverted all inmates on death row to life sentences. And while it's probably still, a relief to the family that he was going to be in prison forever, we all know that there's a chance that people serving life sentences can be released. Even though it's usually not the case, there is always a chance that they can get out on good behavior or any type of reduced sentence. So it wasn't a good development for Lester's sake, and I'm sure there were people on death row who maybe were wrongly accused, or other situations where it was actually a celebration for those inmates. But for Lester and for Mary Ellen's family, this was not a celebration at all. They were very disappointed to hear about it, but still, like I said, pretty relieved that he still would probably never be released, hopefully. When Lester was placed in general population, he exhibited good behavior. He didn't get in any fights, any disagreements, or disputes with other inmates. He continued to maintain good relationships with the guards, like he was networking, like this was his job or something. Like, he was always overly polite with them, and he continued to do his paintings, and that's what he was known for. Like, people would come and take pictures with Lester because of his artwork, even though this awful thing that he had done in his past. But he had people come and visiting him all the time. He always had a visitor at least once a month, and it was just like it went pretty smoothly for him for the first few years. He was really good at putting on this face for people that made them believe that he was a responsible and good person. And he was really good at manipulating and misleading people. And that is exactly what landed him in the honors program in his prison. Back in the 1960s, the government was working on initiatives to help inmates prepare for life after prison, right? Because most of them were going to get released at some point. So it was an effort to kind of reintegrate them back into society. It was for inmates who were considered responsible, who were not likely to reoffend, and who were just working on finishing their time before they could go home. So this program would allow them to get out of the prison, usually supervised, but very few occasions unsupervised. They were able to drive the vans around the premises to obviously just complete different tasks, and there were just other incentives that would give them the opportunity to leave the prison grounds with guards. And in hindsight, of course, we know now that Lester being nominated by the guards for this program was a grave mistake, but of course they probably just didn't put much thought into it. Like, okay, he's been involved in SA situations 3 times that we know about, so he's probably not the person we want that to get reintegrated into society. But nonetheless, he was nominated and he was accepted into the program. 8 years after Mary Ellen's passing, this program gave the prisoners an opportunity to leave the premises again. It was around Christmas time. It was in December of 1973, and the inmates were going to take a trip to the shopping mall. And I know how crazy that sounds, prisoners going to the mall, right? It sounds absolutely absurd. But this was part of this program to reintegrate them into society, and their reward for good behavior was that they could go into this mall in civilian clothing without a guard on their hip, and they could shop for Christmas gifts for their family. Just a quick side note, there is still construction happening outside of my apartment. Normally when I record, I try to hear when the construction is going to take a break and keep recording, but I'm just going to keep recording through it. So if you hear a little bit, hopefully my microphone is filtering out some of it at least, but if you do hear some of it, I do apologize. Hopefully it's over in the next like year or two. I don't know. It's been like months now, so just thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to keep going. So the prisoners were dropped at the mall in the morning, and they were instructed to meet back at this meeting place by 2 p.m. so that the guards could make sure they were all still accounted for. And they were basically told to just go and enjoy themselves. And needless to say, Lester Eubanks never reported back for the check-in at 2 p.m. All the other inmates came back, they got in the van, and they went back to the prison grounds, but Lester never came back. And he basically was given this opportunity to escape wrapped in a bow. Like, it wasn't even like he escaped. He literally just walked away. I can't imagine that a lot of people wouldn't consider walking away if they were prisoners and were just given this civilian clothing day free from any supervision. Like, why wouldn't he take this opportunity given the person that he is? So Lester Eubanks escaped, and right away they knew something was wrong. Police were on the search for him, but there was no sign of him. Usually inmates who escape are caught within the first few hours, but Lester was very clearly on the run, and police believe that he had someone on the outside helping him escape. And leading up to this shopping trip, remember I told you he got visitations once a month usually. Leading up to this shopping trip, his visitations went from once a month to once a week. So it was pretty evident that he was orchestrating with someone on the outside to meet him when he was supposed to be at this mall doing this Christmas shopping. And police basically put out a warrant for his arrest, and it was nationwide. So if he encountered police anywhere in the United States, he would immediately be arrested. And it's totally crazy because, like I said, most inmates who are escapees are able to be caught within hours of escaping because most of them are on foot. They're probably hurt from whatever acrobats they had to do to escape the prison. But in this case, Lester had time to plan. He was in regular clothing. He wasn't walking around in a jumpsuit with chains on him. Like, he didn't look like a prisoner. So he had executed this master plan, and he knew a lot of people on the outside who had been helping him ever since, because years had gone by. And it wasn't reviewed again until the 1990s when it was revealed that Lester Eubanks was still on the run. A new police chief in Mansfield named John Arcudi or Arcudi, I don't know if I'm saying it wrong, but a new police chief by the name of John decided to review the file again to see if any activity had taken place on Lester's criminal record in the years, prior to the 1990s, and see if maybe an arrest was made, but it was just never reported. And he was totally shocked and taken aback to see that the warrant for Lester's arrest had totally been removed. Like, there was no hold or red alert on his driver's license or his social security number. So basically, if he ever got a traffic ticket or if he ever got any sort of run-in with the police, they would not be aware of his prior history with Mary Ellen and the subsequent warrant for his escape from prison. And the new chief was totally taken aback by this, and he knew that he had to reopen this case right away. And obviously, no matter how infuriating it was that the warrant was pulled from his record, it probably was just a clerical error or some sort of follow-up that never took place. And it's very unfortunate and very maddening because this man is obviously an offender who probably has reoffended again, but he was just out there. And this new chief knew that they had to relaunch this investigation, and quick. The chief was able to get Lester featured on America's Most Wanted, which actually luckily resulted in a tip coming in from a woman who says that she had known Lester back in the 70s and that she believed that he had been living with a woman named Kay Banks. And Kay Banks actually turned out to be a woman who was Lester's pen pal while he was in prison, and they established a romantic relationship while he was inside. And Kay actually was the widow of Lester's Lester's cousin. So she had been with Lester's cousin, who was actually killed, and he was a famous singer. And when this relationship was over, she became a pen pal with Lester, and when he escaped, it's believed that he went to go stay with her. So mid-1990s, police go to question Miss Banks, and she actually was afraid because she was worried that she was going to get in trouble for basically housing a criminal, a fugitive, but she didn't actually get in trouble. She gave the police pretty much everything that they wanted to know, and she did reveal to them that she didn't help Lester escape, but when he did escape, he found her in Los Angeles and came to live with her in 1973. And she said that things were okay, you know, for a little while they had a relationship, but his controlling personality really came out, and she felt like her household became his household because he ruled by intimidation, and she really just wanted him to go. She kind of felt guilty for everything that was going on, and you know, the reason that he was there in the first place and the means in which he got there. And she just wanted him to leave. So she came up with this embellished story, this lie. And she came to him and said one day, look, the police have been sniffing around and they actually asked me if I would come in for questioning about you because they think that I might know something. And this plan worked because Lester, according to Kay, immediately left. He didn't even think twice. That same day, he packed all his stuff and he left. But it was believed that he didn't go very far from the LA area. And I just feel like I have some questions for Miss Banks, because even if you had a romantic relationship with him, like, it doesn't even really matter. Like, just knowing what he had done, why would you then allow him to come live with you? I would have been calling the police before he could have opened his mouth to say hello and step foot in my house. Like, I don't care if it doesn't matter how close I am to you. If you can do something as heinous as what he did to Mary Ellen, I'm calling the cops. I'm calling the cops. At the very least, I'm not letting you stay in my home. I just feel like the accountability piece wasn't really there for her in the story when I was doing my research for it. It's like there weren't many people asking questions about this Miss Banks lady who was harboring a fugitive, even though she was afraid that she would get in trouble for it in the 90s. It doesn't matter that you were doing it back in the 70s. It still happened. You know what I mean? After leaving Kay's home, police believe that they could piece together that Lester moved to another area in California where he worked for a mattress manufacturing company. At this time, like in the late 70s, early 80s, water beds were very popular. So like they were booming, they were taking anybody. And we know that Lester assumed an alias of Victor Young, and he was able to get a job at this mattress company because they were just taking whoever. You didn't have to do a background check, you didn't have to do any official paperwork. Give me your name and we can get you in. And we know that Lester actually got a hunting license with his alias of Victor Young on it as some sort of identification, because you didn't have to give a fingerprint in order to get a hunting license. So he was smart. Like, he knew ways around. Obviously that wouldn't fly today, but back then he was able to get away with that. Police were having a lot of trouble piecing together where Lester went after 1986 when he stopped working for this mattress company, but they were able to get in contact with his father, which was a huge thing because up until this point, they didn't have any contact with anyone, or at least any of his close relatives. So his father's name was Mose Eubanks, and he was actually willing to speak with police, but he was not willing to talk about Lester at all. He basically let police come in, he let them sit down, they had a conversation, but when the police tried to ask about Lester, he said, look, people change, people move on, and I'm not saying anything else about my son. So from that conversation, obviously police were frustrated because they were hoping to get more information, but they could tell that he knew where his son was and that Lester was like guaranteed to still be alive at this point in the 90s. So they actually got a warrant to seize Moses' phone records, so Lester's father's phone records, and they saw that there were a series of phone calls coming in from Alabama from this troubled youth recreation center. And by the time that they got the warrant and were finally able to get the records, it was a couple months after the calls actually had taken place. But they gave a phone call down to this youth center, and there was a man who was working there who was under the impression to the police to be Lester, but his name wasn't Lester, obviously, because he was going by different aliases at this point, but he was described to look about the same as the police had suspected. And when the employer gave the police the social security number for this man, it came back to be a fraud social security number. So police were like certain that they were on his tail at this point. But like I said, since the warrant and the whole process of everything had them a couple months behind, when they actually got to the point of figuring out that this was probably Lester, he had actually moved to another city already. The most recent update and development is as of March 2021. So just this year, police are like certain that Lester is still alive and that he's living in the Los Angeles area. They are almost certain, and they've actually come out and released photos of people who worked alongside him at the mattress company back in the 70s and 80s, as well as photos of a girl that they believe that he was dating back at the time. And of course, these photos are old, so the people who were in them are obviously probably elderly. The chance of them finding out about this is slim. But by releasing the photos of these people, the police are hoping that somebody will recognize them in the photos and that they'll be able to come forward, and that hopefully one of them knows where Lester is. There's a good chance. And at this point, he will be 78 years old, which is older. He's probably not out with doing the same awful activity anymore because he physically can't, but still, I don't care how old he is, there is still some level of justice that can be delivered at this point. And I'm hoping that this recent thing, I know it's been some months since the police released the photos back in March, but there's still time. Police have created age progression composite sketches of Lester, and this is what he is believed to have looked like over the years, with the oldest image being what he most likely looks like today. I'm gonna put another sketch on the screen as well that people believe to be what he most likely resembles today. The one of him as an older gentleman kind of looks like he's a little heavier, said what he may look like if he's gained some weight, and the other one looks like him with more of a thin stature still. Lester is listed in the top 15 most wanted people in America today by the US Marshals Service. This list of 15 people is basically a list of the most dangerous and the most elusive people. So the people that the FBI wants the most but cannot find them. Like, they're out there, but we just don't know where. Lester is on this list. In his ripe old age of 78, we still want to find him. He knows people in the States, like across the country, who have been helping to keep him from justice for all of these years. He has a network of people all over. So him being able to be on the run makes sense because there's people enabling him to do it. Lester is 5 foot 11 inches with brown eyes and black hair, and he has a very large scar on his right upper arm, right in this area here. There's a $50,000 reward for anyone who can provide information on the whereabouts of Lester Eubanks. And when I heard about this case and then I realized that this man is still on the run, I was like, hold up. He was able to get away from the police for all these years. Like, he really has to be a smart man to be able to do that. And it's just like, he was described to be cocky. He was described to be opinionated. He was described to be like this charmer and manipulator, and this person who was like a chameleon who could kind of pretend to be one way but actually be another way depending on who he was talking to. So him making it this far isn't surprising to me. It's not surprising at all, especially if he was living under different aliases. People's, basically accessibility to news and pictures and watching TV and social media, obviously it wasn't there back then. They had television, and they had newspapers, but it wasn't on the scale that we have today, whereas we can turn on the TV, see somebody's face, and we've probably seen them on social media before. So it makes sense that he was able to elude being found, but it doesn't mean that he has to anymore. I am being so serious when I sit here and I tell you guys that I sat and thought for at least 30 minutes of all the nice, cute little old men, because if he was 5'11" back then, he's probably shrunk. So he's probably like 5'8" by now. I'm just sitting there thinking, like, are there any nice old men that I know or that I've seen that look like him, that look like this sketch? Like, I've worked in customer service for a long time, so I've been just dealing with the public for many years. And I'm like, Have I seen him? So just think, like, especially if you live in the Los Angeles or the California area, the most unsuspecting people in our society are children and elderly people. So it's not going to be the first thing that comes to your mind is, oh, let me go look for this grandpa who was out here just wreaking havoc on society back in the 60s. But it is important to think about because justice can still be served. Mary Ellen had her life taken. She didn't get the opportunity to live her life. It was snatched from her. And Lester got to live his life. He got to forget all of his responsibility. He got to elude justice. He only served 8 years for a lifetime that he took from a young girl. And it was said that Brenda, who just passed away in 2014, actually felt the grief and the pain of what happened to Mary Ellen until the day that she died. And that's like probably the hardest thing, like just knowing what he did that hurt so many people and he just got to run from it. Like for years, he just got to run, like just live his life, this fake made up life. Like that's just crazy to me. Lester actually told Kay Banks about one situation where he almost got caught. He was just recently had escaped from prison and he actually was in Michigan and he was about to take a bus from Michigan to California. And when he was on the bus got pulled over by police who were coming on to do searches and he swore that they were there for him. But it turns out that they were just looking for illegal fruit that was going from like state to state. And in that moment he was sure that he was caught, but those police did not recognize him. I would just think like if there was somebody on the run like from prison, wouldn't all police units be notified? Like wouldn't they all just have some sort of picture on the, maybe not, I don't know. And it was a different state. So, but he evaded justice. Like it slipped right through the police's hands at that time. And then all the times that they've gotten close but just didn't quite catch up to him. But that is where I'm going to end it. Tell me what you guys think about this case. It's a sad one. And the majority of the case isn't even about Mary Ellen, which makes it even worse because we should be talking about her and her dreams and her family more than anything else. But it's so important to bring this man to justice. Have you heard about this case before? But for all of my viewers, thank you so much for joining me today. As always, it's so nice to see your faces or for you to see my face through the screen. Obviously, I don't get to see your faces, but when you comment on my videos, it makes me so happy. So thank you for joining me. As always, y'all really are some real ones. And I think that's all I got for y'all today. As always, you can find me on Instagram at sunnyshade.v. I'm always over there. That's where I do most of my activity, most of my posting. I don't really post that much. People tell me I have to step my social media game up. I'm a little bit of a grandma, but I'm gonna step it up. I post on my story though, usually at least a day, every other day. So you can go find me over there if you want. If not, that's cool too. You can stay right over here, you know, just chill out with me once a week. That's also fine. But yeah, without further ado, you know what I'm gonna say. If you made it this far, you are loyal. You really are, and I appreciate you. I hope you have a wonderful morning or afternoon or evening, depending on what time it is when you watch this video. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace.